It's not our fault, says Natural England.
I'm afraid I had very scant knowledge of the idea of general licences.
The system was invented by MAF in about 1992, we think. DEFRA carried on the system. When DEFRA delegated it to us, we carried on with exactly the same system.
We are acting on delegated powers from the Secretary of State, so DEFRA, the ultimate policy decision maker, we are acting on their behalf.
The Natural England bosses were in front of a parliamentary committee to explain how they managed to mess up the general licences so profoundly.
The select committees, we sort of wear away stone, really. We keep grinding away, and I think I was trying to get to the bottom of the history of it. How cited were they? Did they act quickly enough? Did they actually need to withdraw the licences? This was the sort of real issue.
You see, I think most of my constituents and most country people in particular think you just got rolled over, and that you didn't sort of fight the corner hard enough.
Now, we got to some of that. I still think there was sort of ministerial interference along the line, which we didn't quite get to the bottom of, but of course it's given us quite a lot of evidence now to present to either Michael Gove or Robert Goodwill, Minister of Agriculture, when he gets to the committee in June.
It's the law that's wrong, says Natural England.
We could not disobey what the law is.
We don't have enough staff, says Natural England.
What I've seen in the first 4 weeks of being in office is an organisation that now is spread very thin. It's cut beyond the bone in certain places.
And forget how many death threats shooters get from animal rights activists. We worship Chris Packham, says Natural England.
And what happened to Chris was completely unacceptable.
Absolutely.
It needs to be condemned, and we did do.
Yeah,
We deplore it.
okay.
Staff from the shooting organisations were in the gallery and they found Natural England's explanations disappointing.
Well, of course, that's her job not to admit anything, but in reality, the people that are out in the countryside are faced with some fundamental challenges, and actually there's very little information that's being cascaded out, and it's made it very difficult for people in the countryside.
She says there's a lot of information.
Well, yes, and that's her job to say there's a lot of information, but actually she was struggling to explain to a number of members of the panel of that, the EFRA committee, about exactly what the rules implied.
Some viewers, almost all viewers, couldn't use the Natural England website in the first week of the general licences debacle. Here is Natural England boss Marion Spain's explanation.
There were two initial hiccups, which we regret. One was that the way that the mailbox had been set up, and forgive me here, I will get it later. It wasn't that the mailbox wasn't big enough. The operating system behind it put in a check. So we had more than expected in the first 24 hours, which meant not all were received. Some people had a bounce back. The second thing, we had set up online PDF applications, which are in the way we do all of our licence applications. Some users found they couldn't access those through Apple systems, so they couldn't access them through an iPad. So by the end of the weekend, we'd resolved those two IT things. So there was a period when some people weren't able to apply.
Ms Spain tried to claim that there's really nothing to worry about. Nothing changes with the new licences.
The law protects birds. Birds are shot by exception. An exception is they cause damage to your crops and nothing else is working. And that hasn't changed from the previous licences. That was the premise on which the previous licences were drafting. And the wording is very similar. It may be tighter, again, to make that absolutely clear, but the law has never allowed you to shoot on sight, as it were, shoot as a first resort. The law is that shooting... I'm from a farming family, just comparing notes with you. I'm from a farming family and I live in a farming area. I live in a rural area. And the farmers around me have a year-round pest control species. They don't simply rely on being able to shoot as a one-off event. They are doing a number of things to keep the populations across their groups of farms, usually, in control. And the new licences doesn't change that approach.
She also introduces a new phrase into the shooter's lexicon. Section 4 defence. So, either you have downloaded the form from the website, filled it out and sent it, or you are covered by one of the handful of new licences, or you can claim you're shooting because it's an emergency, a Section 4 emergency.
And that is a defence that the law prescribes for being able to act urgently before a licence is issued. So it is a defence, not a licence.
I think that those that are involved in trying to protect crops and livestock, and those that are trying to acting in terms of human health, they could definitely rely on Section 4. It gets far more uncertain when you get to conservation.
But Natural England remains opposed to both pigeon shooting when it takes place on a pheasant shoot and the ability of an allotment holder to protect their veg patch from pest birds.
When this crow is attacking a sheep or a lamb, that is due reason to shoot it, is it?
It is, and that's what the new
So
licence now allows.
have I got to prove to DEFRA that this crow is attacking this lamb?
No, you've got to satisfy yourself. The licence as prescribed describes those circumstances, describes the livestock. You've got to satisfy yourselves that the crow is likely, or because of past experience, or what's happening elsewhere, is going to attack the lamb, and you have to
It's attacking the lamb. It's not a past
that's
experience.
clear.
Yes, well, that case, that's fine.
This
I
is
think
the,
my-
this is sorry. This is the bit that's driving everybody absolutely crazy. Is this business that we've all got to sort of work out the intention? If the bird is actually taking the crop or attacking the lamb, that we know what the intention of that bird is.
She said that there were 50,000 people affected by this licence, but she wasn't challenged about how she come up with effectively such a low number. I think many people watching this would wonder quite how many farmers and gamekeepers and people that are managing wildlife are actually affected by this, and clearly it must be in excess of 50,000.
Is there any way you can put across the value of sport shooting, of tourism shooting, and not just pest control?
I think probably they're looking at it the wrong way around. So the value of sport shooting is being able to create a market for being able to do that control, and that should be celebrated in the UK rather than trying to find a problem with it.
The next step is to put DEFRA under the hairdryer.
So when you took the decision to concede the court case, were DEFRA ministers and the Secretary of State aware at that point?
Yes.
They were completely aware at that point.
That point I made earlier, that we consult and agree any significant changes with them,
Okay.
so they were aware.
But then we hear that DEFRA ministers were coming out and then saying they were shocked by the decision.
Yes, right, exactly.
So I'm a bit...
Can't comment on that.
Okay, well I think that's something we'll have to take up in the
Yeah,
next session.
I think fair's got to be
If
fair.
that is the case, then if that is true, then something within the communication didn't work, did it?
Nobody wants to get into trouble with a court case, and so that's why I think these new licenses will have to be quite clear. If you are shooting a pigeon that's destroying your crop is one thing. If you shoot that pigeon on its way home, are you acting lawfully or not? And I think these are questions for Michael Gove or for Robert Goodwill, because I also think, when I can understand the Secretary of State, wanting to try and take control of it, but it was interesting this afternoon where it looked like there might have been some more licences that would have been already reintroduced by Natural England. So one of the sort of legitimate questions I shall be asking the Secretary of State, has his intervention speeded up the process or has it slowed it down?
Natural England turned down our request for an interview after the hearing. If you want to get cross and see the whole of this film, go to our page fchannel/general licenses.